I'm John Koza from Stanford University. One of the central challenges of computer science is to get a computer to do what needs to be done without telling it how to do it. Our new book, Genetic Programming 3, explains how genetic programming addresses this challenge by automatically creating a working computer program from a high-level statement of the problem. Our book presents 14 machine-produced results that are competitive with human-produced results. 10 of these machine-produced results infringe on previously patented inventions or duplicate the functionality of previously patented inventions in a novel way. In his 1948 essay, Intelligent Machines, Turing predicted that search would be important in machine intelligence and identified 3 specific ways to achieve machine intelligence. Turing's first approach was, not surprisingly, based on logic. The second approach that Turing specifically identified was what he called a cultural search that employed knowledge and expertise in the manner similar to what we now call knowledge-based systems. Less well known is the third approach to machine intelligence that Turing specifically identified in 1948, namely the genetical or evolutionary search. In his 1950 paper, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, Turing described an iterative process for creating, modifying, evaluating, and comparing machines, saying there is an obvious connection between this process and evolution by the identifications. The structure of the machine is specified by hereditary material. Change is caused by mutations. Natural selection is implemented by an external fitness measure. Genetic programming is an evolutionary search based on Turing's third way to create a system for automatically creating computer programs. A system for automatically creating computer programs should start from a high-level statement specifying the problem's requirements and produce a sequence of steps that satisfactorily solves the problem. It should produce an entity that can be run on a computer. It should be able to automatically determine, on its own, the number of steps in the solution. It should have the ability to automatically organize useful groups of steps so that they can be reused, and the ability to reuse groups of steps with different instantiations of values. It should be able to use internal storage in the form of single variables, vectors, matrices, arrays, stacks, queues, lists, relational memory, and other data structures, and implement iterations, loops, and recursions. It should have the ability to automatically organize groups of steps into a hierarchy. It should be able to decide for itself whether to employ subroutines, iterations, loops, recursions, and internal storage, and to automatically determine the number of arguments possessed by each. It should be capable of implementing programming constructs that human computer programmers find useful, such as macros, pointers, libraries, and should be able to operate on a full range of data types. It should operate in a well-defined way that unmistakably distinguishes between what the human user must pre-specify and what the automatic system produces. It should be problem independent. Finally, it must be able to produce a satisfactory solution to a wide variety of problems, scale well, and produce results that are competitive with human-produced results. This 16th attribute is especially important because the challenge of machine intelligence is to produce non-trivial results, not the solutions to toy problems. Just what do we mean by human competitive? One of our criteria is that the machine-produced result was patented as an invention in the past, is an improvement over a patented invention, or would qualify today as a patentable new invention. Another is that the machine-produced result is publishable in its own right as a new scientific result, independent of the fact that the result was mechanically created, as evidenced, for example, by being equal to or better than a result that was accepted and published as a new scientific result in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. Genetic programming is an extension to the arena of computer programs of the genetic algorithm pioneered by John Holland in the 1960s. Genetic programming starts with a primordial ooze of thousands of randomly generated computer programs. The set of functions that may appear at the internal points of a program tree may include ordinary arithmetic functions and conditional operators. The set of terminals appearing at external points typically include the program's external inputs, such as the independent variables x and y, and random constants such as 3.2 and 0.4. The randomly created programs typically have different sizes and shapes. The main generational loop of a run of genetic programming consists of the fitness evaluation, Darwinian selection, and the genetic operations. Each individual in the population is evaluated to determine how fit it is at solving the problem at hand. Programs are probabilistically selected from the population to participate in various genetic operations, with reselection allowed. While a more fit program has a better chance of being selected, even individuals known to be unfit are allocated some trials in a mathematically principled way. In the mutation operation, a single parental program is probabilistically selected from the population based on fitness. A mutation point is randomly chosen, the subtree rooted at that point is deleted, and a new subtree is grown there using the same random growth process that was used to generate the initial population. This asexual mutation operation is typically performed with a low probability, say 1%. In the crossover, or sexual recombination operation, two parental programs are probabilistically selected from the population based on fitness. The two parents participating in this crossover are usually of different sizes and shapes. A crossover point is randomly chosen in the first parent, and a crossover point is randomly chosen in the second parent. Then the subtree rooted at the crossover point of the first, or receiving parent, is deleted and replaced by the subtree from the second, or contributing parent. Crossover is the predominant operation and is performed with a high probability, say 85%. The reproduction operation copies a single individual, probabilistically selected based on fitness, into the next generation of the population. Architecture-altering operations provide a way, dynamically during the run of genetic programming, to add and delete subroutines to individual programs, to add and delete arguments possessed by the subroutines and other types of branches, to add and delete automatically defined iterations, to add and delete automatically defined loops, to add and delete automatically defined recursions, and add and delete automatically defined storage. The individuals in the initial random population and the offspring produced by each genetic operation are all syntactically valid executable programs. After many generations, a program may emerge that solves or approximately solves the problem at hand. New biological functions, that is, new genes and proteins, emerge in nature as part of the evolutionary process. The genome of the simplest currently known living organism manufactures only 470 different proteins, whereas the human genome manufactures about 100,000 proteins. Since mutation and crossover modify only a pre-existing gene, the question arises as to how do new genes, that is, new biological functions, originate in nature. Occasionally, a gene may be duplicated, thus creating two places on the chromosome that manufacture the same protein. After such a gene duplication, one of the two initially identical genes may remain intact and continue to manufacture the original protein, thus performing the gene's presumably survival-related function. Meanwhile, over many generations, the second gene may harmlessly accumulate changes and diverge. Eventually, the second gene may come to manufacture a new protein with a new function. In this portion of DNA from an insect's genome, one gene was duplicated and subsequently diverged, so that the two now existing genes manufacture two different but similar proteins with different functions. As another example, myoglobin is a protein that stores oxygen in muscle. A gene duplication, followed by a subsequent divergence, produced hemoglobin, a protein that stores oxygen in blood. These two proteins now have different but similar three-dimensional structures and different functions. Genetic programming uses the architecture-altering operations to automatically determine program architecture in a manner that parallels gene duplication and the related operation of gene deletion in nature. The subroutine duplication operation duplicates a pre-existing subroutine in an individual program, gives a new name to the copy, and randomly divides the pre-existing calls to the old subroutine between the two. This operation changes the program architecture by broadening the hierarchy of subroutines in the overall program. As with gene duplication in nature, this operation preserves semantics when it first occurs. The two subroutines typically diverge later, sometimes yielding specialization. The argument duplication operation duplicates one argument of a subroutine, randomly divides internal references to it, and preserves overall program semantics by adjusting all calls to the subroutine. This operation enlarges the dimensionality of the subspace on which the subroutine operates. The subroutine creation operation can create a new subroutine from part of a main result-producing branch, thereby deepening the hierarchy of references in the overall program by creating a hierarchical reference between the main program and the new subroutine. The subroutine creation operation can also create a new subroutine from part of an existing subroutine, further deepening the hierarchy of references by creating a hierarchical reference between a pre-existing subroutine and a new subroutine, and a deeper and more complex overall hierarchy. The architecture-altering operation of subroutine deletion deletes a subroutine from a program, thereby making the hierarchy of subroutines either narrower or shallower. The argument deletion operation deletes an argument from a subroutine, thereby reducing the amount of information available to the subroutine, a process that can be viewed as generalization. Other architecture-altering operations add and delete iterations, loops, recursions, and memory. These architecture-altering operations quickly create an architecturally diverse population containing programs with different numbers of subroutines, arguments, iterations, loops, recursions, and memory, and also different hierarchical arrangements of these elements. Programs with architectures that are well suited to the problem at hand will tend to grow and prosper in the competitive evolutionary process, while programs with inadequate architectures will tend to wither away under the relentless selective pressure of the problem's fitness measure. Our genetic programming problem solver incorporates the architecture-altering operations into a general-purpose problem-solving mechanism in which program architecture is automatically determined during the run. For example, in the problem involving a sorting network consisting of a sequence of comparison and exchange operations, the architecture-altering operations automatically created two automatically defined loops during the run of genetic programming, each consisting of four branches, namely a loop initialization branch, a loop condition branch, a loop body branch, and a loop update branch. The first automatically defined loop reused the code in its body to compare three pairs of disjoint items, 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, and finally 5 and 6. The second automatically defined loop reused the code in its body to compare a linked sequence of items, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, and 4 and 5. This genetically evolved solution is smaller than that presented by the inventors of sorting networks in their patent, and equal in size to the sorting network discovered and published several years after the patent by Floyd and Knuth, and now known to be minimal. Solving the problem of creating a time-optimal control strategy for centering a cart is known to require information about both the cart's position and velocity. In a run of the genetic programming problem solver, whose input contained only positional information, the architecture-altering operations automatically introduced an automatically defined store to remember past positions of the cart so that the problem could be solved by internally computing velocity. Similarly, architecture-altering operations automatically introduced a 4-branch automatically defined recursion into a GPPS run of the problem of creating a program to produce the Fibonacci sequence. Solving the problem of creating a program to classify protein segments as being transmembrane domains requires global integration of information over the entire protein segment. The architecture-altering operations automatically introduced automatically defined iterations during the run to accomplish this. The architecture-altering operations later automatically introduced one subroutine, and then another, and then automatically created the hierarchical reference by which one subroutine called the other. The best of run individual possesses 2 iteration-performing branches that together produce a biologically interpretable result that is slightly better than the previously published human-written algorithms for this problem. In the central place food foraging problem with multiple independent agents, the architecture-altering operations enable genetic programming to automatically determine the number of processes, as well as the executable steps of the processes, needed to solve the problem. Sometimes the size and shape of the solution to the problem is the problem. In genetic programming, the architecture, hierarchy, size, and content of the evolved computer program is part of the output produced by genetic programming, not part of the input supplied by the system's human user. Problems of engineering design offer a practical yardstick for evaluating a method for automated problem solving, because the design process is usually viewed as requiring human intelligence and typically entails intricate trade-offs between competing considerations. The design process for analog electrical circuits begins with a high-level description of the circuit's desired behavior and characteristics, and entails the creation of both the circuit's topology and sizing. Circuit topology involves specifying the total number of components in the circuit, the type of each component, capacitors, inductors, and so forth, and the way each component is connected to the other components. Circuit sizing involves specification of the numerical value of each component. There is no previously known general automated technique for creating both the topology and sizing of an analog circuit from a high-level statement of the circuit's desired behavior and characteristics. Our approach to circuit synthesis using genetic programming draws on an additional analogy from nature, the process by which an embryo develops into a fully grown organism. One fully developed electrical circuit is produced by progressively executing the circuit constructing functions from one individual program tree from the population. This embryo for a circuit consists of 2 modifiable wires, Z0 and Z1, and is embedded in a test fixture whose input is the electrical signal V source, and whose output is the voltage V out, and that also contains a source resistor and a load resistor. The output produced by these 2 embryonic wires sitting in their test fixture is always 0 and uninteresting. Each circuit constructing program tree in the population contains component creating functions, topology modifying functions, and development controlling functions that grow a simple embryo into a fully developed circuit. Execution of the circuit constructing program tree begins with the capacitor creating C function associated with modifiable wire Z0, inserting capacitor C3 in lieu of modifiable wire Z0. The 7-point arithmetic performing subtree of the C function establishes the numerical value of 403 nanofarads as the sizing of capacitor C3. The next function in the tree, an S function, now becomes associated with C3. The polarity reversing flip function F now reverses the polarity of modifiable wire Z1. The topology modifying series, or S function, now creates a series composition consisting of 2 copies of the capacitor and a new modifiable wire Z4. These 3 new components become associated with an F, S, and L function. The inductor creating L function inserts inductor L8 into the growing circuit. Its arithmetic performing subtree establishes 0.22 microhenries as the value of inductor L8. This flip function F reverses the polarity of capacitor C3. C3 then becomes associated with the E function. The second series function then trifurcates modifiable wire Z4 into 3 modifiable wires. Another inductor creating L function converts capacitor C5 into inductor L7. The 3-point arithmetic performing subtree assigns a value of 0.41 microhenries to new inductor L7. The end function E at the far right of the screen then ends the development of this particular path, as does this end function and other similar end functions later. Modifiable wire Z4 is flipped, inductor L9 is inserted in lieu of modifiable wire Z6, and inductor L7 is changed in value to 0.753 microhenries. Continuing in the same fashion, we get a fully developed electrical circuit. We now have a fully developed electrical circuit. Other topology modifying functions are available, including parallel division. Suppose you need to design an electrical circuit that will pass lower frequencies of an audio signal to a woofer speaker of a high-fidelity sound system. Suppose for low frequencies between 1 Hz and 1,000 Hz, you want a full volt as the output. And for higher frequencies between 2,000 Hz and 100,000 Hz, you want 0 volts as the output. The preparatory steps required of the human user using developmental genetic programming to synthesize the design of such a circuit, called a low-pass filter, start with choosing an embryo and test fixture. The function set includes component-creating functions, such as a capacitor-creating function and an inductor-creating function, and topology-modifying functions, such as series, parallel, flip, and a function creating a direct connection or via to ground, and additional vias to permit connections between distant points in the developing circuit. The terminal set includes zero-argument development controlling functions such as end. The arithmetic performing subtrees that establish the numerical value of components are composed of functions such as addition and subtraction and random constants. The fitness measure for a candidate filter circuit is based on how well the circuit passes the incoming signal in the desired passband and suppresses the incoming signal in the desired stop band. The evaluation of fitness for each individual circuit constructing program tree in the population begins by executing the circuit constructing program tree to produce a fully developed circuit. Each circuit is then simulated to determine its behavior using the SPICE simulator. Fitness is the sum over 101 sampled frequencies between 1 Hz and 100,000 Hz of the absolute weighted deviation between the circuit's actual output voltages and the ideal values, 1 volt for the pass band and 0 volts for the stop band. There's one result-producing branch for each modifiable wire in the initial circuit. Architecture-altering operations may be used to create subroutines or iterations for reusing useful subcircuits. The user must choose control parameters for the run and the termination criteria, say when all 101 fitness cases achieve acceptable values. The best simulatable circuit from generation 0 from one run is the circuit whose development was traced in detail earlier. The fitness of the best individual from each generation of the population tends to improve from generation to generation, while the number of acceptable fitness cases, or hits, tends to increase. The percentage of individuals in the population having a certain number of hits progressively improves from generation to generation. The best circuit of generation 10 consists of what is called a T section, containing inductors positioned horizontally at the top of the T and a capacitor vertically. The frequency domain behavior of the best circuit of generation 10 rolls off a little faster than the best circuit of generation 0. The best circuit from generation 15 is even closer to the desired behavior, and the best circuit from generation 49 is 100% compliant and scores 101 hits. The first result-producing branch of this best-of-run program has 179 functions and terminals, and the second has 127. This evolved circuit infringes on the patent issued to George Campbell of American Telephone and Telegraph for an electric wave filter consisting of a connecting line of negligible attenuation, composed of a plurality of sections, each section including a capacity element and an inductance element, one of said elements of each section being in series with the line, and the other in shunt across the line. The numerical values of the components in our evolved circuit are close to the values specified in Campbell's now expired patent. Since genetic programming is a probabilistic algorithm, different runs produce different results. The previous evolved circuit is a cascade of 6 identical symmetric pi sections, while the 100% compliant solution evolved on another run consists of a cascade of 4 identical symmetric T sections, each with the numerical values specified in Campbell's patent. The 100% compliant solution evolved on yet another run infringes on the patent of Otto Zobel, which combines several T sections with a special half section to produce a sharper frequency domain transition while using fewer components. Patents are issued only if the proposed invention satisfies the statutory tests for novelty, usefulness, and the differences between the subject matter sought to be patented and the prior art are such that the subject matter as a whole would not have been obvious at the time of the invention was made to a person having ordinary skill in the art. The fact that genetic programming has evolved electrical circuits that infringe on previously issued patents establishes that these genetically evolved results satisfy Arthur Samuel's criteria for artificial intelligence and machine learning. Other circuits can be evolved by changing the high-level statement of what is needed, that is, the fitness measure. For example, a high-pass filter can be evolved merely by exchanging the target values, 0 and 1 volts, for the desired stop band and the desired pass band. This evolved design for a high-pass filter exploits the duality, well known to electrical engineers, of exchanging the roles of the inductors and capacitors. Similarly, by merely changing the fitness measure, a bandpass filter, passing frequencies between 1,000 and 2,000 Hz, can be evolved, while a similar change in the fitness measure yields a bandstop filter. This recently evolved bandstop filter infringes on the bridge T filter topology invented by Kenneth Johnson of Western Electric. Genetic programming can similarly produce many highly non-standard circuits, including this asymmetric bandpass filter, described as being difficult to design in a leading analog circuit journal. With similar minor changes in the fitness measure, genetic programming can evolve a frequency measuring circuit whose output voltage is linearly proportional to the incoming frequency, as well as a source identification circuit, including an adaptive source identification circuit where the number of sources changes during the run. Circuits with two outputs can be evolved by changing the initial circuit so that the test fixture has two outputs, and enlarging the embryo so that the incoming signal can be connected to the two outputs. This evolved crossover filter passes the low frequencies to the woofer output and the high frequencies to the tweeter output, and infringes on another Zobel patent concerning the construction of crossover filters. Circuits can be evolved with fitness measures that explicitly consider parsimony or parts count. Because genetic programming is not encumbered by preconceptions that limit its search to well-trodden paths, many genetically evolved solutions duplicate the functionality of previously issued patents in novel and creative ways. This suggests that genetic programming may be useful as an invention machine. For example, on one particular run of the low-pass filter problem, genetic programming rediscovered the elliptic filter topology patented by Wilhelm Kauer, with 5 shunts that were constructed by multiple invocations of an automatically defined function. In addition, genetic programming can be actively directed towards novelty. For example, the elliptic filter topology was separately rediscovered on a run of genetic programming using a fitness measure designed to explicitly engineer around the Campbell patent. A graph isomorphism algorithm was used to explicitly reward circuits that differed topologically from the Campbell topology. We can shift from passive circuits to nonlinear active circuits merely by adding transistor-creating functions to the function set. Our very first evolved amplifier contained a recognizable voltage gain stage and a recognizable Darlington emitter-follower section. Genetic programming has infringed on the now-expired patent of the legendary Sidney Darlington with 12 other circuits, including a high-gain 96 decibel amplifier and computational circuits for square root, cube root, squaring, cubing, and logarithmic functions. Genetic programming repeatedly reinvented Darlington's circuitry because necessity, that is fitness, is the mother of invention. When synthesizing amplifiers, we usually use multi-objective fitness measures that consider factors such as gain, bias, distortion, parts count, and power supply rejection ratio. Genetic programming evolved a circuit for navigating a robot with a non-zero turning radius to an arbitrary destination point in minimal time. The changes in the preparatory steps necessary for this problem consisted of using an initial circuit that receives 2 inputs and defining fitness as the total time needed to navigate the robot to a representative sample of destination points. In evolving this time-optimal circuit, genetic programming simultaneously solved a path planning problem, a time-optimal control problem, and a circuit synthesis problem, using only a high-level requirement stated in terms of time. Genetic programming has evolved a temperature sensing circuit. The preparatory steps for this problem specified a zero-input initial circuit, simulating the circuit at 5 different temperatures, and a fitness measure calling for the output voltage to be proportional to the temperature at which the circuit is operating. Again, the solution was evolved only from a high-level statement of the problem. Genetic programming evolved a circuit that supplies a pre-specified constant voltage in spite of variations in the ambient temperature and the available power supply. The fitness cases consist of 5 different temperatures and 5 different incoming voltage levels, and the fitness measure is the difference between the actual output and the intended constant output voltage. Our genetically evolved voltage reference circuit, the electronic thermometer, our amplifiers, and computational circuits duplicate the functionality of previously patented inventions. A migration between semiconductor technologies, say from bipolar junction transistor technology to metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistors, is accomplished merely by adding transistor-creating functions for MOSFET transistors to the problem's function set. Here's a Gaussian computational circuit that was evolved using MOSFET transistors. Conventional logic-based and knowledge-based approaches to artificial intelligence and machine learning typically require a great deal of I in return for very little A, whereas genetic programming delivers a very high ratio of A to I. Anyone who has ever looked at a floor plan of a building, a corporate organization chart, a musical score, a protein molecule, a city map, or a large electrical circuit will be struck by the massive reuse of certain basic structures within the overall structure. Indeed, complex structures are almost always replete with modularities, symmetries, and regularities. Subroutines, or automatically defined functions, are a very important mechanism by which genetic programming can automatically reuse code, either exactly or with different instantiations of dummy variables or formal parameters. Automatically defined iterations, automatically defined loops, and automatically defined recursions provide additional ways by which genetic programming can automatically reuse code, while automatically defined stores provide a way by which genetic programming can automatically reuse the results produced by the execution of code. Architecture-altering operations provide the mechanism for the self-organization of hierarchies containing these programming constructs. For example, subroutine ADF0 is reused 1, 2, 3, and 4 times because this substructure is very useful in creating this circuit. Reuse avoids reinventing the wheel, on each occasion requiring a particular sequence of already learned steps. Subroutines can be reused with variation by invoking them with different instantiations of their dummy variables or formal parameters. For example, when genetic programming synthesized a crossover filter using the architecture-altering operations, the evolved circuit was generated from a hierarchy of 7 subroutines, including 3 different subroutines, and 3 instances of one subroutine hierarchically calling another subroutine. Inside subroutine ADF3, the dummy variable, arg0, receives the component value for the capacitor from the outside of ADF3. Note that ADF3 hierarchically calls ADF2. The automatically defined copy provides an additional way to explicitly iterate substructure to create a complex overall structure composed of repetitions of a useful substructure. The ability to reuse subroutines also enabled genetic programming to evolve a biologically reasonable motif detecting program for the dead box family of proteins that is slightly better than the motif written by experts in molecular biology for the ProCyte database. Genetic programming also evolved a hierarchy of parameterized subroutines that performed better on a cellular automata problem than a succession of human-written algorithms over the past 20 years. Parameter passing within self-organized hierarchies of subroutines and other branches emerges in numerous other evolved solutions in our book, including problems of polynomial regression, Boolean function learning, induction of the recursive Fibonacci sequence, and time-optimal control. The importance of reuse and parameterized reuse is also described in our first and second books, and we believe that reuse and parameterized reuse are essential preconditions for scalability and automatic problem solving. Genetic programming can be efficiently parallelized, and parallel computers were used to produce all the results in this videotape. Some runs of the sorting network problem were run on evolvable hardware in the form of a $950 PC expansion board containing a 4,000-cell Xilinx 6216 field programmable gate array. All other runs were made on one of two 64-node parallel computer systems, the faster of which had 80 MHz processors at each node and an aggregate speed of 5 GHz. Equivalent computing power can be obtained in April of 1999 with a Beowulf-style cluster computer for about $18,000. Since our first runs of genetic programming in 1987, our experience has been that if genetic programming couldn't solve a particular problem with one computer, it would be able to do so when the problem was rerun on a faster computer. We expect that the rapidly decreasing cost of computing power will enable genetic programming to deliver additional human competitive results on increasingly difficult problems, and in particular that genetic programming will be routinely used as an invention machine. In fact, in the 2 months after completion of our book, while this videotape was being made, genetic programming generated 3 additional previously patented results, and 2 circuits that most electrical engineers think is impossible. Genetic programming currently unconditionally possesses the first 13 of the 16 attributes that can be expected of a system for automatically creating computer programs. And currently also possesses, to a substantial degree, the attributes of wide applicability, scalability, and most important, the ability to produce results that are competitive with human-produced results.